Art of Adventure. This is episode 258 with Kristy Arnett. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer, and guide, Derek Loudermilk. This episode is brought to you by Adventure Quest. Follow Adventure Quest Travel on Instagram, and you can learn more about our trip to Morocco in October for influencers. So for those of you that love Instagram, this is the trip for you. All right, today's episode, I have pro poker player and risk coach Kristy Arnett on the show. And I first encountered her when I was doing the research for the interview with Antisa Jensen. I listened to Antisa's episode on Kristy's podcast. And finally, I get to have Kristy on the show. And I was really interested in particular in how Kristy thinks about risk, because risk, as you've probably heard me say, is one of the key components to adventure. And of course, as a poker player, she thinks a lot about risk within the context of poker, but she's taken that and applied that way more broadly into all different parts of life and in relationships and business. So this episode is focused on how you can think about risk in different ways and how you can think about the outcomes and the way you approach risk so that you are approaching it from a joyful place and that it helps you become the person you want to be. And of course, that it helps you get the amazing outcomes that you want in your life. So without further ado, here is Kristy Arnett. Kristy, welcome to the Art of Adventure podcast.
Thank you so much. Does that mean I'm an adventurer? I'm so excited.
You are. I should do a thing where I send out like a carrier pigeon with a special badge of adventure status for all my guests.
Yes, adventure status.
Actually, a golden eagle would probably be more appropriate.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Very excited to have you on the show. We've been following each other on Instagram for a while. I think Antisa Jensen, who is a guest on my podcast, I think that's how I found you. Was I was researching her. She was on your show, and I was like, oh, Kristy's talking about risk, and risk is a important component to adventure. And so I'd love to talk about risk in many different ways. And to start, I think when you know you're going to take a risk, when someone knows there's a big challenge ahead of them, it can be daunting. And there's sometimes people back away from a risk, or sometimes they fumble it, and sometimes they're very tough. And there's all these different things that can happen when you're in the middle of it. So how do you prepare mentally when you know you're about to take a risk?
That's a great question. And there are a couple of different ways that I'm going to answer it. And so first of all, when it comes to taking a big step, one that is uncomfortable, one that perhaps you need to be someone you've never been and do something you've never done, what will carry you through it is the reason you're doing it and your big vision and where you're headed. So, for example, I am taking on something that is harder than I could have ever imagined, which is writing a book. And my goal is to get it published and to reach lots of people. And the risk is sitting down every day, spending time and energy on something that maybe no one ever reads, or putting it out there and then having people not like it or judge or whatever, it not be quote unquote successful. But the reason I'm doing it is because I believe that the message is so important that maybe it will help a few people take risks in their life so they live the life they're meant to and have the love in their life that they've always wanted. And so the vision I have and my reason carries me through whenever it's hard and I want to stop and it's scary. And usually that reason is bigger than yourself. So it's not like, oh, because I want to be like cool or something. Or, when people come and ask me about, oh, they want to lose weight, if their reason is just because I want to like not wear 3 sizes bigger than I always have or whatever. But if their reason is I want to stick around for my kid and I want to be healthy and they envision their life as a 7-year-old and taking adventures, with you or going on trips, like if that's their vision, where they're headed and their why, that will carry them through. And then I also have this equation that I run people through because I love what you said. You're like, or sometimes they get stuck, and this happens a lot, right? People, we get stuck in our minds, and a lot of people call this analysis paralysis. So this could be in the moment when you're taking a risk. Just like I like bringing examples, like small examples from my own life. I hope this is helpful, but
yes.
I was at a networking event for podcasting, and I saw this woman, Lori Harder. She's got an amazing podcast in the personal development space. She's a fitness guru and beautiful and tall, and she was wearing these bell bottoms. She had like a 6-pack, and like she was looking so pretty. And I was like, oh, I want to talk to her. I want to. I think that would be cool. Maybe we could collaborate or something. And then I got stuck in my head of like, well, ooh, she's talking to somebody, or maybe I don't know exactly what I should say, or maybe she doesn't want to talk to me. And I was getting stuck in my head. And this is one of those things that I've learned to do, and I try to teach people how to do. And so hopefully this is something that you guys who are listening can take with you. And when there's a risk in front of me that I want to take, but I'm starting to get stuck in my mind, I'll run myself through this, which is, what is the worst, most likely scenario that I imagine happening? And I don't know, Derek, what do you think? Like, I want to go talk to this cool podcast girl. What's the most likely negative, not cool, or not the best outcome? What's most likely?
If she brushes you off. It's like, I'm too busy right now.
Yeah, exactly. Just like, nah, you're whatever. She's like the most likely scenario. It's not going to be like, you weirdo, get out of here. Like sometimes I think maybe like we worry about. So that's the most likely scenario that doesn't work out. What is the best possible option that could happen? I mean, I don't know. Maybe we become best friends. Maybe she comes on my podcast. Maybe we do something amazing together. That's like the best possible outcome. And the most likely outcome is that we have a nice chat for a couple of minutes. It's probably the most likely. And then I ask myself, is the best possible result worth risking the worst, most likely scenario? And I'm like, oh man, that best possible scenario, that would not be possible unless I take the 10 yards in front of me and walk up there. Yes, the best possible scenario is worth risking her just saying, nah, brushing me off. And so it helps me just like, okay, reframe my mind. And something in poker is higher the stakes for what's at stake to take the action. And I probably sound crazy when I'm like walking myself through this at a networking conference, but I
hope that you're doing it out loud. Yeah. Okay, let's go, Kristy.
Yeah, crowds of people around me just talking to myself. Okay, Kristy, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? So.
Gosh, that's so beautiful. That formula is so perfect, because if you didn't have that formula, you just wouldn't consider those things. You would just be left with the feeling of, I'm uncomfortable with this. And yeah, you play out those different scenarios, and then it's super obvious. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to go. And did you go talk to her?
So I came up with this after this equation,
Okay.
this situation, because the pain of not talking to her, and then so the moment passed, right? Like we only had a few minutes break. She was talking to other people, and then the moment passed, and I sat back down in my seat, and I was sitting there stewing,
Oh,
like
yes.
the regret of like, and then kind of like beating myself up, oh, you're never going to make it, Kristy. If you can't go talk to this person, like, how are you going to make it? And so I was sitting with that pain and I was like, what was I afraid of? And then I started talking myself through. And it's funny that it was actually this, small non-action that I got to work through what I would have said to myself if I could go back and take that action. So no, Lori Harder has no idea who I am. She's just really pretty and cool and has her podcast. And maybe
I think we should send her this clip and be like, "You're pretty and cool, and this is what I wished I would have done. Can I have a second chance?"
Yes, I should. And she seems like a really cool person. Maybe she would be receptive. But yeah, I think that's a good idea. I should do that.
That's yeah, I love that. I love that formula. I'm curious about the difference in, that felt a certain way. It felt like a certain type of risk, and I imagine the book feels a little bit different because it's a much longer type of risk. Do you have any delineation or way of understanding like what type of risk that you're facing?
That's a good question. And I think that anytime, and this is something that this is my own struggle and journey, is that anytime I'm feeling stuck or resentful or not enjoy as I'm taking a risk, I stop or I take a moment because I think that the bigger picture is missing, and even in the small case of Lori Harder, I think the bigger picture was missing. So that's a really good question. I'm well, I do also when I talk to people. Sorry, I'm like circling around. But I think that there are risks we can take in different areas of our life. And I think that certain people with certain personalities have trouble in certain areas. So there's like actually 4 quadrants in which people generally fall in where they don't take risks in their life. And we can go over those if you want to.
Yeah.
And so maybe that would be more helpful if we talked about those in terms of how people know what kind of risks they're taking and how to attack or be with those certain risks.
Yeah.
That
I
makes
love
sense.
That sounds great.
Okay. So we'll do it. So what is that okay if I ask you these questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
And you can, but it's a little bit harder with you because anybody who's done a lot of work and a lot of risk taking and a lot of adventuring and have spent years in the area of, taking on their scary parts, you're going to already be much more well balanced, like in all the different quadrants, because we're a part of each, but we generally tend to fall into one. So I just want to say that. So you might be like, it might not be
your results
really
may vary.
hardcore.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So are you more of a formal or informal person? Are you more conservative or outgoing? Are you more of a sender of information or receiver?
I guess I'm more conservative than I'd like to be.
Okay.
I feel like I like to be good, whatever that means. And so it prevents some forms of being out there and taking a stand being weird. I've always been weird, and it's always been something that I'm a little uncomfortable with.
Okay. Are you task-oriented or people-oriented? Of course, we're all both, but what do you lean towards?
Definitely people oriented.
People?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you would tend to be more in the like supporter area. So these are so there's four.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are a little more free and outgoing and out there and senders, those people are more of the promoters, and then those who are task oriented and conservative, they're more analyzers.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are senders of information out there, like and also task oriented, those are controllers. And these are all meant to be like neutral names. I know we all have our ideas of like how each of these words sound, but they're supposed to be neutral because we all have strengths and we all have places that we aren't as out there with. And so the supporters are people who are very empathetic. They connect very easily. They love being around people. They love supporting people. They're often coaches and like love bringing people up. But they often struggle or put this like on the back burner, taking risks for only themselves and their own desires. So these tend to be people who are like, oh, I live my life for my kids, or in that way. And so I think it's amazing that you are both a supporter and an entrepreneur. That makes you, and then obviously we follow in all those things. So do you find that to be true at all for you? Do you find that taking risks based on your just singular desire is difficult?
Sometimes it feels selfish, because I do have a responsibility to family and clients and things like that. So it's like I will tend to choose to support other people a lot of times before taking care of myself. So how that relates to risk, I think when I have this space and time, like before I had a family, I was actually pretty good at being selfish in that regard. Like I'm just going to go off on my own and do a thing just for the hell of it. So it sounds like it's contextual for me.
Yeah. But it's so interesting. It's also so interesting that you say, your immediate reaction is, oh, it might be selfish. And you've done so much work and you're clearly a very balanced and smart and loving man. But I think like where, people who are listening, the beauty here or the thing to take is that if you find yourself ever feeling resentful or angry about all that you've given, perhaps where you can look is, are you taking risks for yourself? And that can often look like self-care, like someone who has a family being afraid to say, you know what, guys, I need 2 hours. Would you be willing to support me and allowing me to like take a bath? Or do you know what I'm saying? Like they're almost even afraid to just say like, could you support me?
That's, yeah, I can totally see that in myself and see how a lot of people who, it fills them up to be giving all the time, and the sort of like a limitless fountain of giving, and then all of a sudden they haven't given to themselves because, yeah, they're so good at taking care of other people. Yeah. So the risk there is simply asking for that support from the rest of your family or friends. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to touch on the other ones in case people are feeling like, oh, but I'm a sender of information and I am task oriented,
Yes.
which is me. So if there's 4 quadrants, you're in the bottom left, and which that's my husband, by the way. He's a supporter too. And I'm on the other quadrant, which is the controller, which is, I'm really good at going for things and like kind of like being a bull in a china shop and going straight ahead. But often, and this is what I've had to learn and was a component in my marriage that did not work, that I had to tackle head on, which was I often don't slow down enough and take relationship and vulnerability risks to slow down and be with people in their pain or to listen, because I'm like, just like trying to like get shit done, the task oriented.
Yes.
So that's where whenever I'm starting to feel out of control or resentful or something that isn't quite right, I know it's because I haven't taken the risk of stepping away from work and creating space for relationships. And another quadrant, the bottom is the analyzers. These are the receivers of information, and they also are task oriented. These people are really, really great at thinking things through, and they are very loyal, and they keep their word, and they figure things out, and they say they're going to do something, they do it because they really planned, because they've analyzed it. But when they're starting to feel constrained or maybe lacking adventure, the risk that they can look to, the risk that they're not really taking, is taking action on the things, or being I'm trying to think of another word for adventurous, but spontaneous. They're lacking spontaneity.
Perfectionism sort of shows up there, I'm thinking.
Exactly. They want everything to be in line, and they want to have answers and certainty before they move. But the problem is that we know that we can never be certain about anything, right? And so that's where they get to look. And then the other side, the promoter side, these ones are people. They're people. They love to party. They're the life of the party. They're charismatic and amazing. But the risk that they get to take when they're starting to feel out of control, resentful, or whatever, it's they are lacking in taking the risk of actually planning. Because they're the kind of people who have big visions but no action. Sometimes they're not on time. They need to take a look at if they're keeping their word, and those kinds of risks. So it's like the risk of actually taking smaller steps. And I know this is like a lot, and we all in different spaces, because some people say, oh, well, in work, I'm a controller. At home, I'm a supporter. So in different dynamics, you might have different things.
Yes.
But if it's helpful, I'll write this. I actually haven't written this all down, but anywhere yet, other than the writing of the book. But I can put this somewhere for people to ask themselves this question and maybe have some guidelines and ask themselves, in what area of my life could I be really taking some risks?
I would love to see that as like a doodle on your Instagram, something where you like hand draw, like, are you here? That kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I'm not a good doodler. Maybe I need to hire a doodler. I'm a terrible drawer.
Well, 4 quadrants. You can do the doodle. You can do it.
Yeah.
I believe
you're right. I can figure it
out. One thing that I didn't do was I've always wanted to be a cartoonist, and last year I was like, I'm gonna draw a cartoon every week, but I never got around to it. I used to doodle all the time, but it's interesting how many people say they're not good at doodling when like we can draw like a circle for a face, and we can draw a little rectangle for a body, and we can sort of draw some lines for movement, and all of a sudden you're an effective doodler. But there's something there around how we label ourselves, like either I'm good at this or not. So maybe that's a good segue. how do you label yourself, or how do you change your identity? I think you said something like when you have to be someone you've never been, how do you pick the identity that's going to serve you and live into it if you've never been it?
That's such a good question. And also I'm curious too. And it's just, so when you said, yeah, okay, wait. I want to answer this question and then I want to come back because it's just the interviewer in me. I know I need to, but okay. So I so agree. And it's like, it's the sort of unfortunate thing about the way that we speak. Like, I am not a good doodler. And then I define myself as that. And thank you, because it's such a great distinction to highlight here, because someone could say, I am not a risk taker, or I am not an adventurer. And I think, when we talked for my podcast, when I interviewed you, we talked about the art of adventure and it being a mindset. And I really, if we can look at all of our areas of our life, we can usually find an example in which we are whatever it is that we really need to be in whatever action we're about to take. And so, for example, if we're talking about someone who wants to find the love of their life and they have never been on a date before. I was coaching somebody who he'd been a workaholic. He was around 25, and he just hadn't really had a real relationship. So of course it's going to require that he's going to need to be someone he's never been if he's been previously afraid to approach women. And he's like, he did the same thing. He's like, I am just not good with women, or I am just not confident. And then I asked him, and he was actually a poker player. And I asked him, so are you confident at the poker at the poker table?
Yes.
He's like, yeah, of course. It's like my home. I'm like, okay, well, tell me what that part of you is like when you're confident. He's like, well, everybody can tell I am, the way I touch the chips, the way I sit at the table, the way I speak to everybody. I'm like, okay, so what does that look like? He's like, oh, I guess I would lean back in the chair. I'd sit straight up, make eye contact with people. Like, yes, exactly. It's not that you are not confident. You have confidence. It's just this state of mind of being it in another situation. And before he would go, because, part of what we did was identified risks required to get him to where he wants to go, which is going and approaching women.
Yes.
So his challenge was to go to this is hardcore. He's hardcore, and I got to give him credit for this. But he went to a coffee shop, and his challenge was to go talk to a woman. And before he went in, what we did was bring him to the state of mind of when he's at his most confident. So he would close his eyes. We would take a few breaths of resourcing energy where you get really present in your body, like where you are, and remember what it's like to be confident in another place. And then we would run through the scenario of the equation that we talked about, and what's the best possible case scenario here? She could be the love of your life, and you might miss it. You might miss it. And then so he's like, okay. And he's changed his state of being. He has raised the stakes, and he knows too that when he walks out of this coffee shop, he's still going to be alive. And that's really how I think using all those things and getting present is how you challenge yourself to be and do something you've never done.
I love that. Yeah, that you already have the thing that you're seeking. That's very liberating and empowering to, even if, it's not, I'm showing up this way all the time. There are moments when I am already the person or the way that I want to be. Yeah, that's That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I want to give you the opportunity. You had a thing you wanted to ask about.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes. You said I wanted to doodle every day and I didn't get around to it. First, why did you want to doodle? Just how come you wanted to do that?
'Cause it's fun, and I love cartoons. I think, it's one of the, cartoons and jazz are like the two great American art forms. And I have a collection. I have several hundred historical comic books, all the greatest newspaper, funny artists throughout history. And so I just love the art form, and I would love to participate in the art form. And the reason I didn't do it is because it's just, it was another thing, and I take on too much as it is. And so it was always priority number 7, and it just got lost by the wayside.
I think it's so sweet because we're, those who are listening, Derek and I are speaking via Skype video. And when you talk about doodling, it's like he just had this like, oh yeah, like this sweet kind of demeanor change. And so I think that's awesome. I just want to reflect that back to you. And I'm curious if when you say it became your like 7th priority because you take on a lot of things, I wonder how much of the things that you take on are in service. If it's probably, maybe all in service.
Well, I'm the type of person that, I've always got an idea for 100 adventures and a bunch of people I'd love to interview on the podcast. And so I have all these things I'd love to do. And it's like, I want the day to be longer. I want to live forever so I can fit it all in. And you just, I end up at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I did the top 15 things I wanted to do, and there's another million that I didn't get to. So I have to learn to be okay with wanting to do more than I ever can. Yeah,
for sure. And I guess like hope that, as someone who kind of, you're such this incredible person who leads new leaders into their best selves, that if what, my theory is true, which I could be totally wrong, and, our quadrant could be wrong, but if it is true, that maybe perhaps taking that risk to carve out I don't know how long it would take to doodle, but if that is maybe being pushed aside because it's one thing that's just for you.
Yes, it's definitely a possibility. Thank you for illuminating that. Now I think the listener and I, we understand how you can think about this, like making risk real for these little things, because I think, and maybe this is just me, when I think about risk, it's certainly like a big thing, but a doodle is carving a few minutes to draw a cartoon is a very small risk in terms of consequence or time scale, but it's still something you would have to face if you're going to do it.
Yeah, and thank you for that feedback, because I think that is part of a difficulty in how I communicate the risk. Because some people, especially as a poker player, some people are like, oh, you mean just like go gamble and like put all your house on red? And I'm like, no. First of all, poker is a game of skill. It is one that includes luck, but luck will never determine your fate, and that's why I like it. It is completely different than any other game that is betting against the house, like roulette or craps or something, because I think life mirrors poker in that, what we try to do every day is put the odds in our favor. But in the end, we don't have 100% control of how everything turns out, and if someone else will love us back, or if our business will make a certain amount. Like, of course, we're going to do everything we can, put the odds in our favor, but there is an element of unknown. But over time, if you continue to take the steps with and put the odds in your favor and learn from every experience and move forward, you will, as in poker, win in the long run. And so I just thank you for that feedback, because I think it's important to highlight that often risk taking is actually, because some people are just like, they're just like the F it kind of people. F it, I'm just gonna go for it. F it, I'm just gonna like do it, do the things. And maybe their risk is not doing what they always do.
Yes.
Maybe it's actually inaction. Maybe it's actually slowing down, tuning in.
Interesting. This question popped into my head, a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about how prayer and chanting and various things can affect medical outcomes. It can increase the rate of healing, or get rid of tumors sort of magically. And I imagine there's moments in a poker game when you're like praying for the card you want, and maybe there's a set statistical chance of an outcome. Do you think there's any possibility that you can influence the percentage outcomes by something other than the statistical likelihood of drawing a certain card, like from a energetic spiritual praying sort of place?
That's so interesting. And the short answer is, I don't know, because I do believe that there are lots of ideas and phenomena in the world that I cannot say for sure yes or no, that I don't understand, or would have the gall to say for sure anything. But my first instinct, and perhaps this is what I've had to learn, or the approach that makes me the best poker player I can be, is to actually do the opposite, which is when I'm in a game, one of my objectives is actually to not spend any energy hoping that the next card is anything, because my viewpoint is that I can't control. So I guess I come from the view that no, that I can't affect the cards, and that wishing that something would happen, or spending time like, oh, I hope my aces don't get cracked or something, keeps me from making the best decision possible in the moment, which is just, here is what's happening. It's neither good nor bad. I just need to take in all the information and make the best decision possible.
Yes, and I can see how that would let you be a better poker player. I'm curious, you've been playing poker for more than 15 years, I think. Mm-hmm. I'm curious about your progression, and we both have read The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin, and I think he talks in there about how masters see the board differently. They chunk the pieces into a single unit of information, so they're actually looking at less total moves than a beginner. So I'm curious, as you look back at your skill progression in poker, what you're able to sort of chunk together, and sort of what the new level of decision making or approach that you didn't used to have would be.
Well, one of the reasons why that book was so impactful to me is because in the beginning, he actually talks about how you are one of two different kinds of learners. Do you remember that part where he was like, one is like the incremental learner, where you think that winning basically, or the result is everything, whereas someone who is process oriented cares about the process along the way. And I had a tiger mom who was like, if you don't get an A+, then you're like grounded and you don't get to eat. So I was such a results oriented learner. So my beginning in poker was very, very difficult, because results in poker are over time. And if you look at just one single session, whether you win or lose, if you win, it doesn't necessarily mean you played well. If you lose, it doesn't necessarily mean you played bad. And so in the beginning, I was like, I would win. I'd be like, I'm the best player ever. And then I would lose and I'd be like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I should just quit. And it's so in the beginning, it was just, I was not equipped to handle the ups and downs, process information, become a better player, because I was so results oriented. And then over time, I learned that variance is part of the game, which means, and it's part of life, which means that failure and setbacks, or the turn of a card or getting unlucky, it's mathematically built into the equation of poker. So like if you had pocket aces, which is the best hand you can have, all in, you have all your money in, and against pocket twos, which is the worst pair you can have, still, even though you made the right decision of going all in, you'd still lose a small percentage of the time. I think it's like 16% of the time because of the way the cards run out. And so these are like, just like that small example of stuff that I would have to do in my head and be like, do math in my head. So to answer your question, now, because some of these things are just unconscious in me, the level at which I can pay attention into certain detail of like someone's bet size, how much they bet, it's just a little bit more clear when I don't have to spend so much energy on like the bigger stuff. So it's just like the fine tuning is in the details, really. And it's a little bit, sorry if this is a little hard to explain, because I'm trying to do so in a way for people who actually don't play poker.
Yes.
But yeah, but the idea that losses and setbacks are part of the equation was like one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn, that no longer now do I need to spend time and energy or mental space worrying about that. And so that allows me to chunk like all that information into, it's just like already there. So then I can focus more on like, oh my gosh, did she bet like a little bit more than she would with these kinds of hands, you know?
Yeah. So there's, so you're able to get more rich information from things that wouldn't have been a signal otherwise. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, gosh, losses are part of the equation. It's like when I'm working with entrepreneurs, there's always going to be someone who doesn't want to buy the thing that they have, or the time isn't right or whatever. And so there's always going to be a no, and rejection can be very hard when it's wrapped up with the outcome versus eventually someone will say yes, and it'll be the perfect match. You know, your ideal client will be so happy that they bought the thing from you.
That is such a great example, because when an entrepreneur gets rejected, and if they don't remember that it's part of the equation, like not everybody's going to say yes. If they get caught up exactly like you said, they might miss the opportunity of what there was to learn about the no, or they might be less confident going into the next conversation, which should have been or could be a yes, if they're still, wrapped up in what is just mathematically part of the equation,
Yeah. So I'm imagining that once you sort of embrace the variance, then you don't have to beat yourself up as much. You don't hold on to it as long. Is that accurate?
Exactly. And in a game like poker, and in some cases in life, if like the entrepreneur had back-to-back enrollment calls or something, there's something at stake. In poker, if you're hanging on to the last hand, your decision-making will it matters. It's money. So if we call it tilt. So if like something happens and you see a player go on tilt, their next decisions, they might not be sound decisions. They might just be like going all in because they're upset, which is, just creates a whole bigger problem.
Yeah. And So like if someone was going all in because they were on tilt, that would be their ego is involved and they're trying to like use that to, I don't know, maybe soothe themselves or gain control in some way. Is that what's happening? Okay. Interesting.
Exactly. And I'm sure you see it too in other areas of life, especially when you're taking people on adventures. It's like when something doesn't go right and people don't embrace the variance, that ego part of them has them in pain. And when some people call that resistance or not surrendering to what is. And when people are trying desperately to get out of the pain that they're in, or but not just acknowledging it and being with it and being present with it, it just comes out so sideways and explosive sometimes, or angry, and it actually makes it worse.
Have you ever experienced, I mean, I'm guessing you at some point experienced that feeling of tilt, and what did it tell you about yourself? Because I feel like when the chips are down in general, when something is really hard, like you start to see people's true nature bubble up. So what have you learned about yourself from that?
Juiciest question, and I love it. I love it so much because you're right. So in poker, when you've lost chips, your true character, or it's the opportunity really to face the part of your character that likes to bring you down, and for me, what I face is, if I am not winning, am I worthy of love? Which I mean, to extrapolate that from a poker game years ago, I would have never been able to. I'm just like, no, that guy's just an a-hole because he got lucky. That would have been my analyzation of the whole situation. But now with this, all that I've learned, and I still struggle with this, even as a professional at the table. If something happens, I get really unlucky, I can feel it. And I know immediately, though, it's because I am afraid that if I'm losing, what it says about me. Because so much of we mentioned this before, my identity is wrapped up in winning, being the best, results, A's, getting A's. That's why I'm like such a controller and like take risks and forget to slow down. Because the way I was brought up. And so when I'm there and I start to lose, I start asking these crazy questions like, oh, is my husband going to love me? These things. And so that's what drives my tilt. And so that's what I've really gotten to face. And I think that no matter whether it's poker, relationships, business, when you face something that's hard and that comes up and you start to feel the tilt or whatever, it's the opportunity to look at what's driving that tilt. What are you afraid this means about who you are? And by embracing the variance and looking at like what this is, the opportunity to help show you, because it's really easy to be the best person when things are going great. Yeah. But true character, leadership, as you know, when you go on an adventure and go on things where things, travel is like the best example. It's like things never go right when you're traveling. Flights are delayed. The flight attendant doesn't want to give you the right meal. It's so what do you get to face and how do you get to face it? That's like juice. I get so excited about being with people and talking about these times when you're like, fake shit,
Yeah. It's so cool that you can have that sort of like vision of yourself, self-awareness, I guess, and be observing that you're experiencing this, and then also be above it, being like, okay, this is Kristy experiencing the tilt, and I know why, and that gives you a little bit more ability to choose what you do next.
Exactly. It's altitude. It's not that it never just comes up, it still comes up. I was just like playing poker the other day and I made a mistake and it came up like, but I take a few moments, take a few deep breaths and like move forward. But yeah, altitude is so important. That's another great distinction, because I think sometimes we want to do it all perfectly. Oh, I'm supposed to know this. So like, ta-da, it's never supposed to happen again. But our things are always going to be our things. We just gain altitude, like you said. We can look at it in a different way.
Kristy, it's been a lot of fun, and I want to acknowledge you for going to vulnerable places and being real and very, very insightful how you explain things. And I love that you're using yourself as an illustration for the things we're talking about. I think it's about time to wrap. I want to actually ask you about crafting beautiful questions. This is something I believe is a shared interest between us. How do you approach asking a good question?
Interesting. I think when I first started doing interviews, I would just write down a whole list of questions that I think I quote unquote should ask. And when I started just learning how to be a magnificent listener, which I don't brag a lot, but I'm a really good listener. Okay, it sounds like I brag a lot. Whatever, it's fine. And actually, I guess wanting to bring this full circle and touch points from what we talked about earlier, that our biggest pains and when we're really facing it is when we can have the opportunity to learn the most. And I mentioned a tough time in my own marriage. I've been with my husband for 14, almost 15 years. There was a time where we reached the brink of the divorce. And one of the things he kept saying to me was like, you never listen to me. You never listen. You're a terrible listener. And I was like, at first I was like, whatever, you're wrong. But I really had to face it. And so since then, it was my mission to be an extraordinary listener. And it was out of that I think I honed my skills of asking questions. And I do actually want to acknowledge you for this, because I can tell that I feel heard by you and your questions. You would draw something out of what I said and make, bring full circle and make connections that, when I'm just like talking, it's hard for me to do, but I could tell that you were just an extraordinary listener. And so there's no real, I don't know, beautifully crafted questions. I just want to really get in there with people and pull out like what I'm really hearing. And I hope that answers your question, but
yeah, that's wonderful. And thank you for that. I think our approach is similar, and there's some level of empathy and understanding embedded within a question, which, when people feel understood and that where they're coming from, it's much easier for them to keep going and talk about the juicy stuff. So very juicy conversation, wonderful stuff. Kristy, where can people find you online? Where's the best place?
Just KristyArnett.com. It's where I host my podcast, and also I make videos on the internet, mostly about poker currently, but I'm starting to make videos in the relationship space and risk-taking and things more general than just poker. But everybody can find that on KristyArnett.com.
Brilliant. Kristy, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Another great episode with Kristy. I love how she framed the worst result as a reasonable risk for a chance at the best result. Comparing like what is the worst that could happen really, and what is the best that can happen really, and is that worth doing? I just love that. And how she mentioned the importance of joy in risk taking and who you're taking risks for. Why are you taking risks? These are all really great questions that sometimes we just skip right over, don't even think about. And I particularly love the process-oriented instead of results-oriented mindset. It ties a lot in with a growth mindset. And of course, it can be really hard when you don't get the result you're hoping for. And if you can stick with the process-oriented, take the ego out of it, so much better for long-term improvement. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about this trip in Morocco, Adventure Quest travel we've got going on in October 2019. That is a trip for people who want to be influencers. So if you love photography, if you love Instagram, if you're a thought leader, if you want to use Instagram to grow your business, if you want to get free travel, if you want to become a better photographer, and of course, if you want to get out of your comfort zone in some pretty epic locations, then this is the trip for you. You can find out more at adventurequesttravel.com and AdventureQuest Travel on Instagram. All right, that's all for today's episode. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.